Hello and welcome to session 4 of the Terrazzo Sweater Knit-Along. Terrazzo is the sweater by Petiteknit that is knit with a strand of silk garden sock solo and a kid mohair. For our purposes, we are using silk garden sock solo and Rowan kid silk haze. So welcome back, and tonight what we are going to be doing is we are going to be looking at picking up around the neck edge and doing the Italian bind off. So if you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up or a like on the comments. Hi Amy, hi Sandy, how are you guys doing tonight? So we have had this going for 5 weeks, which doesn't seem like very long, but a lot of you have already knit your entire sweater, so you are ahead of me. I am just barely keeping up, but it's been really fun. So before we get started, does anybody have any burning questions that are plaguing them right now with their progress? And go ahead and tell me in the comments where you are in your terrazzo. I know that we've sold a lot of kits recently, so I know many of you are probably just starting, and that is totally fine. These videos will be here forever, so you can see them whenever you're ready for them. Hey Whitney, hey Liz, hey Zanfu, so nice to see you guys. All right, so I'm going to do this in kind of a weird order because I have only so much stuff that I can present. So I wanted to start with picking up the stitches around the neckline. Let's see. Almost finished your first sleeve. Okay, great. Started second sleeve, still have to do neck. Yes. Hey, Susie. All right. Okay, so I know that we're all, like I said, we're all at different places on our sweater, and that is totally fine. But let's just go through picking up the neck, and here's the method behind my decision to do that. The neck is worked in not just a twisted rib with a single face, but a twisted rib that's worked on both sides. So I have some fabric worked in a twisted rib that I'm going to use later on to show you how to do that Italian bind off. And I want to go ahead and show you how to work the purl through the back loop on that same piece of fabric. So that's my thought. So good. Okay, let me go ahead and put this camera up. Okay, so this is my terrazzo neckline. Okay, here's the front neck. Let me see if I can back this camera up just a smidge. Yeah, okay. So here is the back neck, here is that shoulder line, and here is the front. There's no right or wrong on where to start. I typically start over here on the right shoulder, but for tonight, I'm going to start on the left shoulder so that we can go ahead and get to the front neck first, which is the trickiest bit. So when we're picking up stitches, we want to use a smaller needle. We're going to use the needle that gives us the gauge of 23 stitches over 4 inches in the twisted rib pattern, like the designer says. So when we're picking up stitches, we want to pick them up at a very particular rate depending on what kind of stitches they are. So these are stitches that are basically cast on stitches. I call this the horizontal. So these stitches, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up 1 stitch in every stitch. Now remember that this was worked in this direction, opposite the way we're looking at it. So we're going to have like this weird little half a stitch there, and that's okay. We're not going to pay any attention to that right now. We're going to pick up in what appears to be a whole stitch. So I'm going to pick up, going to put my needle right through that V, wrap the yarn around, and bring it through. I'm going to do that 1 stitch in each of those 6 stitches. There probably won't be 6 stitches, there'll be more like 5 because there's a half a stitch on either side, as we talked about. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, our 5 stitches. We could go ahead and pick up right here, but I don't want to. What I want to do now is I want to go ahead and pick up along this angle here that is where we had our increases. So I want to pick up 1 stitch away from the edge. And if we look at the fabric in the direction it was knitted, we can see that this is our selvage stitch and this is our first stitch. And I want to pick up right here. So this is where I'm going to put my first stitch. Make sure you don't get more than you need. Okay, so that's my first stitch. Now, as a rule, I don't pay too terribly much attention to how many stitches the pattern says. I like to pick up at a rate of 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So that means I'm going to pick up here where I picked up, and then I'm going to go into the next space. And you can tell you're in the right space because there's 1 bar at the back. So 2, 3. Okay, and now I'm going to pick up, I'm going to skip, and I'm going to pick up again. 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm willing to play chicken with this a little bit. I'm willing to pick up these stitches and then count them, and if it's not right, I'm willing to go back and do the whole thing again. If that's something that makes you a little bit crazy, then you can go ahead and pick up exactly the number of stitches that your pattern tells you. And the best way to do that would be to divide your back and your front in half. Not exactly in half, because you see the back is fewer stitches than in the front. So anyway, that's why I think it's a good idea to go ahead and pick up according to my little formula here. And I didn't make this up. This has to do with the ratio between stitch and row gauge in stockinette. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to skip. So it does get a little wonky here where we have our increases and whatnot. Do you see how right here there's kind of a big space? I'm going to go ahead and skip that space and then not skip later on, because I never want to pick up where there's a great big hole. I think we talked about that last time, how that can increase the size of the hole later on. So do you see how I am picking up along that column of stitches? Oh, I got off there, didn't I? Look at that. No, I didn't. 1, 2, 3. Does everyone feel comfortable with the whole concept of picking up stitches here? This is a pretty important piece of it because it's very visible there at the neckline. It's less important when you picked up in the underarm area because very few people are going to be checking that area out, I hope. But here at the neckline, where you pick up your stitches is pretty visible, so you want it to be, you want it to be nice and tidy. All right. So I think I'm okay with the way that looks. There we go. Okay, and now I'm ready to go ahead and pick up across. These are the stitches that we cast on, mid-row to make our front neck. And again, we are going to pick up 1 stitch in every stitch. So right here at the edge, I picked up in this column. It's not actually a stitch, but you know what I'm talking about. So we'll go and we'll pick up 1 stitch in every stitch. All right. So before I head back up on the second side, I want to count how many stitches I picked up between the cast on stitches and these 5 stitches so that I can pick up the same number on the other side, or approximately. You know, 1 or 2 stitches doesn't matter, but a whole bunch would matter quite a bit. So here are the 5. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, say. Let's call it 14. So I'm going to try to pick up 14 stitches going up the other side. Yeah. 13. Yay, 14. Okay. Put one right here. Okay, so that is how we pick up along the front and the angled edges. The rest of this is just straight up picking 1 stitch in every stitch, and that's going to be super easy. And then when you're finished, go ahead and count the stitches that you picked up and make sure you're reasonably close to the number of stitches that your pattern says. Okay? Okay, does it make sense to everybody? Okay, let's see. Binding off last inches of hem. So tell me, Anne, are you doing the Italian bind off? Hey, Rose. Hey, Terry. Hey, Eveline. Nice to see you guys. Okay, so good. All right, so now the pattern says for you to work that neckline in a double-sided, what does she call it? What does she call that? Twisted rib. I don't know how she's differentiating that from the other twisted rib, but the twisted rib that you were doing on your hem and your cuff, you were just twisting the knit stitches and you were purling the purl stitches. And in this one, she has you twisting both the knit and the purl. So let me show you how to do that and make sure that it's clear to everybody. Okay, so if you are working your twisted rib, let me back up. Okay, if you're working your twisted rib, you know you're working into the back of the knit stitch. Everybody's used to doing that. But for the purl stitch, you're also working into the back of the purl stitch, which means you're coming all the way back here and putting your needle through the back of that stitch and purling it. So what that does is it gives you this twisted effect on both sides of your fabric, because this is just this single twisted rib, and you can see that on the back, those stitches that are not twisted, those are my purl stitches from the other side that I didn't twist. So doing it this way by knitting into the back of the knit stitch as well as the purl stitch is going to give you a column of twisted stitches on both sides, which is important for the neckline because the collar folds down. This is definitely slow going and a little bit fiddly, but it makes a nice effect. So do you see how the stitches on the back side are starting to get twisted also? Okay, let's see. Evelyn says, I use the same size needle for the double twisted neck rib as for the body. The smaller needle made it too tight. Okay, good to know. So part of the thing that's sort of interesting here is that she gives you a gauge for your twisted rib. So it would probably be worth it for you to check your gauge. Most designers don't give you a gauge unless it's important. So that would be something that you really probably want to think about. So I am going to unknit this twisted rib, and then I am going to attempt to show you the Italian bind off. I know a lot of you do this already and you're very good at it. I am not a pro at it. It is not my strong suit. I can do it and I will show you, but it's one of those things that I need to be doing practically in a vacuum. I can't have anybody distracting me because if I get off, I will lose my place and then the whole thing will be a mess. And there's nothing worse than trying to take out Italian bind off. It is no fun at all. Tell me in the chat if you have had that pleasant experience. All right, so where did I put my little sewing needle for this whole process? I have so much stuff here, my gracious. Give me a minute. Okay, Ellen, no bueno. No bueno. Here it is. I heard it. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate it on this big fat pink yarn because I think you can see that better. Oh, my Lord. Anybody else have thoughts on the needle size that you're doing the ribbing or the twisted ribbing on? I would love to hear in the comments how you have found that to be. Move all of this out of the way. Mercy. My goodness. Okay, so to do the Italian bind off, you're going to want, I have just a little sample of work here. You're going to need 3 times the width of your fabric. So 1, 2, 3, and then I like to have a little bit extra to sit in my needle. Let's see, Anne said, the Italian bind off took all my concentration, but I love it. Yes. So true. Absolutely so true, Anne. Yes, you make a brilliant point. Okay, and I will tell you that it's been a while since I've done this, since the Stockholm. So I really had to kind of go over it in my head. And I think it's really helpful if you set the time aside where you know you're not going to be interrupted and you're able to just work straight through and get in a groove. I will also tell you that it is a really, really good idea to just cast on, 15 stitches or an even number of stitches, 16, 18, 20 stitches in a nice smooth worsted weight yarn without mohair, and work a few rows in ribbing and then try your Italian bind off. Okay, just so that you can get that practice in, because you really want your bind off to look nice. And it's only going to look nice if you kind of know what you're doing and you feel really comfortable with how tightly to pull the stitches, and you know you're not going to make a mistake. So it is worth practicing and practicing a good bit until you feel completely comfortable with it. In this pattern, she has you do some tubular setup rows where you're slipping the purl stitches with the yarn in front, and then you're slipping the knit stitches with the yarn in back. What that does is it sort of tightens the ribbing up a little bit because you don't have the yarn that's making those stitches in between. It's just a strand that's running across. So it really just kind of tightened that edge a little bit to make it a little bit tidier. For the purposes of this demonstration, I do not have those tubular setup rows in place. I am just going to do the best that I can with the stitches with the plain old ribbing stitches. Okay, so it's really kind of like grafting, and there are lots of ways that you can do this. I'm sure you've seen it many places where you slip every other stitch to a separate needle, and then you're basically grafting those stitches together. If you have been with me a long time, you know how I teach knitting together, seaming stitch to stitch. It's that same process, only the stitches are on your needle, so everything looks just a little bit wonky. Okay, now we have a setup row to start. Okay, and now the assumption is that our first stitch is a knit stitch, and for our setup row, we are going to insert our needle with that yarn attached. We've got a nice blunt seaming needle, and we're going to insert our needle purlwise. Whoops, there goes my mic. Okay, we're going to insert our seaming needle purlwise through that first stitch, and we're going to leave it on the needle, right? And then we are going to insert our needle from back to front. So, okay, my goodness, this is where I always kind of get messed up. From back to front and into this next stitch. Okay, so we're coming between these two stitches and we're inserting our needle knitwise through the second stitch. Okay, so now we're set up and we are ready to go. And this has the same kind of rhythm as grafting does: knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. So what we're going to do for our first one is we are going to knit, put our needle into that first stitch as if to knit, and slip it off, and then we are going to purl, put our needle purlwise into the next stitch, the second stitch on our needle. And now we are going to come back and put our needle through that first stitch and pull it off. And we're going to come back to front into that next stitch and insert our needle knitwise. You see how we're putting our needle knitwise through that stitch. This is definitely fiddly. All right, coming back to our first stitch. So knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. Knit off, purl on, purl off, and then knit on. So you can see how this is making a nice little ribbing-like edge on there. And it's not perfect and beautiful at first, but after it's all done, we're going to kind of zhuzh it and make it look really great. All right. Knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. Knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. Knit off, purl on. I still have to say this. Purl off. And then this is the one that's tricky, coming back to front between those stitches and through that stitch knitwise. Knit on. All right, so you can see how attractive that makes, you know, that bind off. It looks like there's no beginning and end to the bind off, right? So it is very pretty, and it is probably worth doing, worth learning, worth practicing, and worth implementing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? Did that make sense? Yes? Evelyn said, I had to watch a lot of videos. Yes. It is definitely fiddly. But I think, I mean, certainly for me, I've been kind of messing with it on and off. I mean, it's an old technique. It's been around a long time, and it really is very beautiful. Some issues that I have with it over a long space, and you can tell me what you think, Anne, since you've just bound off the entirety of your hem using this method. As you're working those stitches, as you're binding them off and bringing the working yarn through the stitches again and again and again, it can wear the yarn. You know, it can wear it down to the point that it gets very thin and very fragile. So one of the things that you can do is you can go ahead and get yourself another piece of yarn and sort of add it in. Just leave a nice long tail and then begin working your Italian bind off with the second piece of yarn. I would advise doing maybe half your stitches with the first piece of yarn and the second half with the second piece of yarn, making that change over at the side where you're not going to notice it so much. Oh, I forgot to tell you, when you get to the last two, you're going to insert your seaming needle through the first stitch as if to knit, and then through the second stitch as if to knit, and then just take them off. And you will then, when you're working in the round, you'll just seam them together and close it up as you would any other ribbed bind off. But you are going to probably have to fiddle with it and zhuzh it a little bit. This pink yarn that I was using is very fluffy and kind of moves into shape without slipping off too much. So it is definitely a little on the fiddly side. But if you practice it and if you enjoy doing it, absolutely go for it, because it does make a very pretty edge, and it's a skill that is worth learning, worth knowing how to do. Yes, absolutely. Anne makes the point that the mohair does protect the yarn. I remember when, oh gosh, what was it? Was it TNA? It had to be like 2008, 2009, something like that. When single ply silk was all the rage. Everybody had a single ply silk, and they were carrying it with a kid silk mohair. And it was so beautiful. But the thing that was really nice is that, that silk, being a single ply and being silk, it pilled like nobody's business. But the mohair, when you carry it with it, it really, really protects it. So the mohair not only gives it a beautiful halo, whatever yarn you're using, it protects it, and it keeps it from pilling or getting us so much wear, So good. So how are we doing? Everybody good? Everybody kind of know where we are, feel comfortable with this? I hadn't planned on doing another knit along, but what I was going to do, and tell me if this is something that you'd be interested in, after this is done, I thought I would kind of talk about my thoughts on the pattern and what I might do differently next time, because there are a few things that I would do differently. And I would be interested in hearing those of you who finished this a good bit ago, or who are way ahead of me, like Eveline and Rita. I would be interested in hearing, your thoughts. Are there any things that you would do differently if you had this to knit over again? I think one thing is I would move my increases at the neckline. I would move them in more than one stitch. So when you're making those neckline increases where it says knit one, increase, or make one, I would knit two and make one, or even three, so that you have a nice clean place to pick up those stitches. Because if you noticed, it was a little fiddly to pick up those stitches where the increases are. So it's much easier if you don't have the increase messing with that column where you want to be picking up your stitches. So, any thoughts? There's always a little lag in the stream when people make comments, but if not, I will be reaching out to you and asking you directly. I'm looking at you, Rita and Eveline. All right, well, good. So it's been really fun to do this with you, and I appreciate your patience with me, knowing that this was kind of a learning experience for me in terms of, the top down, but it has definitely got its great points, and I love the fabric, and I'm super excited to wear it. I'm excited about the fabric. I'm excited about the shoulder fit for a top down. I think it's one of the nicer ones that I've seen. So anyway, we'll talk more about that next time. So until then, let's see. Until then, all right, knit fabulous. What was it I wanted to tell you? Knit fun, wear fabulous. All right, ladies, have a wonderful evening. Ooh, Mary asked, will we be able to see the other finished sweaters? If you are interested in coming on next time and sharing your sweater with me, send me a message and let me know, or comment on the video and say I would be willing to share my sweater, because I think that's fun. I think everybody would like to see. So that's a really good point, Mary. Thanks so much. All right, knit fun, wear fab. Bye.